For the last stretch of this series, we've been living in really loud quadrants. Change the world brands, they push against something. Foster belonging brands pull people into a circle. Different jobs, but both aimed outward. Toward the market, toward the crowd, toward a problem to solve, or people to gather. The explorer faces the opposite direction. It lives in the find fulfillment quadrant, the quiet corner of the map where motivation turns inward. And three archetypes share that space. The sage seeks truth, the innocent seeks renewal, the explorer seeks freedom. Not the romantic version sold in Travel Act, but the kind that comes from leaving familiar ground and discovering who you are once the usual structures disappear. The mistake is assuming the explorer is a travel archetype. Travel is only one expression of it. You can build an explorer brand without selling a single plane ticket, and you can operate an airline that behaves nothing like an explorer brand. The quadrant tells you where the motivation points, and the archetype tells you how it gets there. And here's the explorer's method. It's discovery, not necessarily travel. It promises freedom through experience, through stepping into the unfamiliar, expanding your understanding of the world, and returning changed by what you've found. Not just out there, but maybe what you found within yourself as well. Let's talk about how this really comes to light. If you strip down the explorer, and there's basically 5 motivations that simply remain underneath. Freedom comes first, the desire to choose your own direction without someone else defining the path. Discovery follows, driven by the belief that growth exists beyond what is already familiar. Then comes self-expansion, the motivation many brands overlook. Explorers are not collecting destinations, they're expanding their identity through experience. Authenticity keeps them moving because conformity obscures who they actually are. Finally comes possibility, the refusal to believe the map is complete. There's too many things to see in this world. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan built much of their self-determination theory around autonomy, identifying as one of the 3 psychological needs fundamental to human flourishing. The explorer archetype amplifies that need more than any other archetype in the entire set. The research I find most useful comes from Leif Van Boven and Tom Gilovich's 2003 paper, To Do or to Have, that is the question. They asked people to reflect on either an experiential purchase or a material purchase, then measured which brought greater happiness. Experiences consistently outperformed possessions. More importantly, that advantage grew over time because people naturally weave experiences into the stories they tell about themselves, while possessions usually just age out. I used to treat that finding as universal. Experiences beat possession, end of discussion. But the follow-up research paints a more useful picture. The experiential advantage is strongest amongst people who already value experiences. It becomes much smaller and sometimes disappears altogether for people with fewer financial resources, where purchasing a durable object is often the more rational and beneficial decision. And that distinction really does matter when thinking about branding. The lesson isn't that everyone secretly wants experiences. It's that explorer brands resonate with people already motivated by exploration, growth, and self-expansion. Those people willingly trade possessions for stories because stories reinforce the identity they're building. If your patron isn't motivated that way, no amount of sweeping mountain footage or open road cinematography will create it. Archetypes are magnets, not conversion tools. The explorer's promise is actually quite simple. Go somewhere different. Return somewhat different. And that is incredibly powerful to ruminate on. The explorer archetype has many strengths. I like to call out key 3 to 5 strengths that really matter most. Those motivations don't really stay internal. They shape how the brand behaves, and that's where the explorer becomes visible. The first one is fearless pioneering. Explorer brands move toward uncertainty before everyone else does. They enter emerging markets, test unfamiliar ideas, and experiment with new behaviors while competitors wait for proof. And it's not recklessness, it's a willingness to accept uncertainty as the price of discovering opportunities others can't yet see. The second trait and strength is curiosity and openness. Explorer brands remain relevant because they keep learning. They investigate publicly, share what they're discovering, admit what they haven't figured out yet, and invite their patrons into that process. Counterintuitively, uncertainty handed honestly often builds more trust than pretending to have every answer all the time. The third strength is adaptability. When conditions change, Explorer brands don't defend the old map. They draw a new one. Market shift, technology evolves, consumer behavior changes. The Explorer expects all of it because change isn't a disruption of the journey, it's basically the journey itself. The fourth is leadership through discovery. Explorer brands don't lead by declaring themselves experts. They lead by finding something worth sharing. Their audience follows because the destination is compelling, not because the brand demanded attention. And the fifth, by no means final, but the fifth one I want to call out is resilience. Explorer brands develop resilience because uncertainty isn't an occasional obstacle. It's the environment within which they operate. When plans change, competitors panic because uncertainty was part of their, or certainty. When plans change, competitors panic because certainty was part of their strategy. The Explorer adjusts because adaptation has always been part of its identity. Counter to the strengths, every archetype comes with a certain set of weaknesses or challenges. They call it the shadow side of the architect, of course. I have pulled out 5 here as well. Every strength carries essentially a seed of weakness, and Explorer brands rarely fail because they stop moving. They fail instead because they never stop moving long enough to build anything durable. So the first weakness I want to call out is restlessness. The same drive that pushes an explorer toward new opportunities can pull it away from good ones too soon. Constant reinvention may feel exciting internally, but it creates uncertainty for patrons. They stop recognizing the brand they choose. They stop recognizing the brand they chose. Exploration needs direction, and without it, novelty becomes essentially something that overtakes. Impulsivity is the second weakness. Explorer brands often mistake movement for progress. New ideas arrive faster than existing ideas mature. Products launch before they're ready. Strategies change before they're measured. Strong opportunities are abandoned because something newer captures the attention of the leader or the brand. Activity creates the appearance of momentum, but motion without purpose rarely produces growth. The next weakness is isolation. Independence is attractive until it becomes exclusionary. Explorer brands sometimes become so committed to standing apart that they stop inviting people along. Distinctiveness turns into distance. The brand begins speaking to itself instead of the patron it exists to serve. The next one is distance. Self-reliance can also reduce emotional connection. Explorer brands naturally emphasize capability, confidence, and independence. Without moments of warmth, those same qualities can feel detached. Patrons don't simply want to admire a brand, they want to feel understood and seen by it. The next one, and last in my list, but certainly not last of all, is burnout. Endless exploration carries a cost. Teams grow tired of perpetual reinvention. Patrons grow exhausted by constant change. The strongest Explorer brands understand that reflection is part of discovery. They create moments to appreciate how far they've come before setting out again. So many brands have adopted the Explorer archetype, some well, some not so well. I've pulled 3 that maybe are a bit surprising. I think these 3 brands demonstrate essentially 3 different expressions of the same archetype. And the first one is Harley-Davidson. Harley-Davidson is almost always classified as a rebel. You got the leather, the chrome, the noise, Marlon Brando leaning against a motorcycle in The Wild One, and the imagery feels undeniably linked to rebel archetype. But as we always say, that's a personality. The history of Harley-Davidson tells a different story. The outlaw reputation didn't originate inside Harley-Davidson. It was largely built around the company. In July of 1947, the town of Hollister, California hosted an American Motorcyclist Association Gypsy Tour. It was a sanctioned touring event, not an outlaw gathering. The weekend became rowdy. There was drinking, property damage, and roughly 50 arrests, mostly for public intoxication. A photographer from the San Francisco Chronicle posed a rider on a motorcycle surrounded by beer bottles that appeared to have been carefully arranged. Life magazine published the image under the headline, "Cyclist's Holiday. He and his friends terrorize town." 6 years later, Marlon Brando rode a Harley in the wild one, cementing the public association between Harley-Davidson and rebellion for generations. Even the famous one percenter mythology rests on uncertain ground. The story claims the AMA responded by saying that 99% of the riders were law-abiding citizens, leaving the remaining 1% to adopt the patch proudly. The AMA has since stated it can find no evidence it ever made that statement. The outlaw identity was shaped as much by media as by motorcycles. Now, compare that mythology to the business Harley-Davidson actually built. In 1983, facing financial collapse, Harley-Davidson launched the Harley Owners Group, or HOG, HOG for short. Rather than cultivating rebellion, the company created organized touring communities. Members earned mileage awards, participated in destination rides, completed cross-country challenges, and traveled together. Today, the organization includes roughly 1 million members across more than 100 countries. Look at what the company rewarded with this move. It's pretty clear. They weren't encouraging defiance against an oppressive government or force. It was about discovery. Researchers John Shelton and James Mix Alexander embedded themselves within Harley communities and published their findings in the Journal of Consumer Research in 1995. They concluded the community wasn't held together by rebellion or anti-authoritarian behavior. It was built around shared experiences, travel, and identity. They described Harley riders as subculture of consumption, organized around participation rather than resistance. Their work examined one community rather than every Harley rider, but the pattern aligns closely with the explorer archetype. The rider who spends years planning a trip to Sturgis isn't escaping society. He's pursuing the experience waiting beyond the next horizon. It's not about going to Sturgis. Of course, that's the reward at the end of the trip. It's about the trip itself. And without that, the whole Sturgis enigma or aura would be broken down. The next real-life brand example I want to give is Trader Joe's, because it doesn't look like an explorer at first glance. A grocery store seems like an unlikely fit. We have to look closer. Joe Coulombe opened the first Trader Joe's in Pasadena in 1967 after recognizing he couldn't outcompete 7-Eleven on convenience or price. Instead, he noticed two unrelated trends. College enrollment was rising. Boeing was introducing the 747. His conclusion was that Americans would travel farther, experience unfamiliar food, return home, and discover they couldn't buy those experiences in a traditional supermarket. So he built the store for them and the brand. Coulombe famously described his ideal customer as overeducated and underpaid, one of the most accurate customer profiles ever written, in my opinion. The South Seas theme, the ship's bells, the captains and crew, even the theatrical store design, all reinforce the feeling of exploration. Some experiments worked, others didn't. Coulombe later admitted several of the elaborate in-store installations were mistakes. That willingness to experiment, though, is just as explorer as the successful ideas themselves. The business model reveals the archetype even more clearly. A traditional supermarket carries roughly 50,000 products. Trader Joe's stocks about 4,000, with nearly 80% sold under private labels unavailable anywhere else. Seasonal items appear and disappear constantly. Scarcity isn't operational inconvenience, it's actually part of the experience altogether. The shelves invite exploration. People don't shop at Trader Joe's. They wander and explore and look around. Every visit offers the possibility of finding something unexpected. Some argue Trader Joe's belongs in the everyman archetype because of its approachable pricing, friendly employees, and welcoming atmosphere. Those qualities certainly exist, but I see them as more supporting behaviors rather than the core motivation. People don't return because they already know exactly what they'll find. They return because they don't. And I think that's the operative shift there. The last example I have here is to pause. The last example I have is REI. REI demonstrates something many brands never do. It behaves like its archetype when the discussion becomes expensive. In 2015, the member-owned co-op closed all 143 stores on Black Friday, suspended online ordering, and paid roughly 12,000 employees to spend the day outside instead. No major retailer had voluntarily walked away from the year's biggest shopping day. The campaign became known as #OptOutside, and roughly 1.4 million joined in. The cynical interpretation deserves consideration. REI's customers were never the people camping outside electronic stores at 5 a.m. Closing may not have carried the same risk it would have for another retailer. But even if you grant that point, the decision remains significant and impactful, and it's worth really diving into, because sales still grew by more than 9% that year, and REI eventually made the closure permanent. Brands rarely repeat costly symbolic gestures unless those gestures accurately express who they are. And that is truly the distinction here. Many brands borrow an archetype for a campaign, or maybe for the branding, and then it never goes anywhere beyond that. But REI embedded theirs into the business model itself. Explorer wasn't a creative concept that had an ethereal moment. It's basically operational behavior, because that is how an archetype has been brought in fully when a brand operates against that psychological driver. That's what archetypal integrity looks like. So closing this out, the Explorer is driven by freedom and fulfills that promise through discovery. It essentially says, your path to paradise and happiness is out there. It's the journey. Go find it. Its value has very little to do with distance and everything to do with the transformation. The destination matters less than the person who returns from it. If you're evaluating whether this archetype belongs to your brand, don't ask whether your marketing feels adventurous. Ask whether your patron is motivated by that self-discovery, by that travel to find or explore to find happiness. Do they actively seek unfamiliar experiences? Do they believe growth comes from leaving what's comfortable? Do they value expanding who they are more than protecting who they've always been? If the answer is yes, the Explorer might be the right fit here. If the answer is no, adding mountains, hiking boots, road trips, or passport stamps to your marketing won't make it one built on the archetype. Because archetypes don't begin with aesthetics, they begin with motivation. The Explorer also asks something different of the organization behind the brand. It requires accepting uncertainty, resisting the comfort of repetition, and trusting discovery enough to keep moving when the destination isn't completely visible. Many brands like the appearance of exploration, but far fewer are willing to behave like explorers when certainty disappears. So that wraps up this episode and this installment on our Archetypes Wheel. It's all about the explorer finding fulfillment by searching for it and realizing that the fulfillment is found in the process of the search itself. And I think this particular one is a really endearing one. And I see a lot of parallels in humanity when children are growing up and they start to find themselves looking for a sense of self outside of the confines of their home. So when you live in a home with, let's say, a caregiver and a more sovereign archetype operating as parents, the need to find oneself becomes a pressure that you can't ignore. And I think that's a part of the human life cycle, really. And that's why I think the explorer archetype is quite brilliant. So the question is, can your brand take the risk of being certain about uncertainty and build a brand from its core through its personality and what it produces through the lens of the explorer archetype? And if you do that, I think, judging by these 3 examples, and there are plenty more, it's a highly successful brand when you do. As always, I would love to hear what you think about this. Have you worked with the Explorer brand or archetype before? Have you built brands on it? Do you have things that you disagree with that you heard? I'd love to hear all this. Please put it in the comments. And please do like and subscribe if you get a chance. That really helps me keep this thing going. Until next time, keep charging ahead and cheers.